Yeah, just before I show the video, last Sunday I had the pleasure of being in my local pub and listening to Bob Massey, who's up the back there, a local historian and great storyteller. And it was a lovely way to spend a Sunday night, having a pint and listening to local history. So check him out if you get a chance. He's worth listening to. My fee is in the post, thank you. But one of the things I took away from that evening was, at the end, people were asking him questions, and one of the answers he came out with is that he reckoned in a couple of 100 years, when people like him try to look back on local history, there's going to be a problem, because we live in this instant world where we see something, now, oh, look at that food on our plate, we must have a photo, and then we delete it, and everything is very transient, and it's going to be very difficult for them to figure out, no, what was Brexit about? No, and what was this pandemic about? And it made me think, what are my memories about COVID? And for me, or for us, it was the time that we joined this church. Also the privilege of being there on the front line, as it were, in the hospital. However, one of my cherished memories of lockdown were the regular cartoons that were shown online during the recorded services. And in particular, that wonderful sound. 1, 2, 3, A-O, yep. And that to me is COVID, A-O. And it made me smile every Sunday. And just for a moment helped me to forget about what was going on in our country. So this morning, as John's already alluded to, we're going to watch a cartoon of Joseph and his brothers, but unfortunately the Hey-O isn't in there. But let's just sit back and maybe it'll evoke memories of the 2 years of lockdown. Hope I've been not too traumatic watching it again. But a familiar story for all of us. Interesting family dynamics. I'd hazard a guess to say that Joseph definitely wasn't the spare in his family, but rather the favourite brother, which can bring about its problems just as big as those who feel left out. I'm sure none of us here this morning will have found ourselves in a physical pit like Joseph, but I'm sure that if I was to give you a few moments to think about it, you'd probably come up with 1 or 2 metaphorical pits that you found yourself in the past. Pits that weren't maybe of your own making. A pit of circumstances that someone else had put you in, no doubt in your eyes unfairly. And these pits in your life have left their mark in you, maybe even to the point that they have formed who you are. I guess it could have been worse for Joseph. They could have left him there to die. But instead, they hauled him out of the pit, sold him into slavery. And what we just seen on the screen was the things that subsequently happened to him until the time he met his brothers. Well, we didn't actually see that, but we know the story of how lots of things happened to the point that he was suddenly in power. And there was a famine. And the brothers came to him in search of food. And one of the things that struck me was interesting is that why didn't they recognize him? But I guess 20 years had passed and since he'd been put in the pit, and I guess he changed. I don't know about you, but one of the things that really annoys me is when people come up to me that I haven't seen for 20 years and say, "Oh, you haven't changed one bit." And I think, well, that's a bit of an insult, because I've lived life. Hopefully I look a bit different. Hopefully different experiences have made me look a bit different. So, but you know what I mean. No, they didn't see him. Anyway, they didn't recognize him. And he could quite easily have got some revenge for all that he'd done, for all that they'd done to him. Instead, He lavished so many gifts on them, as well as loads of food, and sent them back to Jacob with these final parting words. And I love the way the Message puts it. It says, take it easy on the journey. Try to get on with each other. That'd be a good thing for all of us. Take it easy on the journey and try to get on with each other. You see, he forgave them after playing around with them just a little bit. He wasn't holding on to a grudge. He wasn't allowing the past events to hold him back. The experience in the pit, being sold into slavery, didn't define him as a victim. He'd made a new life, lived a full life, not always an easy life. And his life experiences included the pit, and they all contributed to who he was. It is this that I want to spend some time this morning looking at. And I was trying to think, how could I put it into a few words? And the best I could come up with is this: redemption after hard times. Redemption after hard times. During the course of my talk, I'll share a couple of things from my life, very personal things, and there'll be an opportunity at the end for all of us to have some space with God as we ask him to deal with our pit experiences. The first experience I'd like to share with you isn't, well, I suppose it's dramatic, but isn't that dramatic. I go back to 1990, which seems like a lifetime ago. I was working as a bank manager for personal customers in the Co-op Bank in Watford. I'd just come back from holiday, from a wonderful family holiday in Cornwall. Went into work on the Monday morning to find I'd been made redundant. And as the bank wasn't in a very good position financially, I didn't get a very good settlement of redundancy. I had a large mortgage, 2 children still at primary school, and I'm sure you've seen these films and dramas where the person who's made redundant goes out each morning at the same time with his sandwiches, pretending he's going to work. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't go down that route. But what I did feel was anger, because I knew they got rid of me. And it wasn't just because I was surplus to requirements. There was other things going on. And I thought of fighting it and exposing some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. But I didn't. We spoke to the kids about what was going to happen and how we were going to get through this, how we could manage to stay where we were. But my initial reaction was to try and find another job in banking, because that's all I'd known since I'd left school 22 years earlier. And in so many ways, that day in August 1990 was the worst day of my life, but it was also one of the best days of my life. You see, about, was it 2-3 years earlier, we were at Spring Harvest, and we shouldn't have been at that meeting. We should have been babysitting about 20 kids from our church. But we found ourselves in a meeting, and the guy that was speaking, something he said impacted on me, and so it's a big talk with quite a few hundred people in it, maybe a few thousand, and it was like the altar call, if you feel God has led you. And as those words left I stood up to give my life to God, but I did nothing about it because life was too comfortable. I was earning good money, we had a good life, and I just put it to one side. But that day in August 1990 forced the issue. I no longer had that comfortable existence. So that door closing opened the door to be able to serve God and his purposes. Redemption after hard times. In his book, The Purpose Driven Life, Rick Warren talks about the third purpose for each of us. And the heading he gives to this section is, you were created to become like Christ. And for the next 7 days of his studying the book, he writes about how we can grow and be transformed so that we can become more Christ-like. And one way that we can achieve this is being transformed by trouble. You see, I truly believe that God has a purpose behind every problem. For Joseph, being dumped in a pit and sold into slavery was a fairly major problem. But it was the starting point of his journey that ultimately led him to the point where he was a man of immense stature, and his position allowed him to meet up again with those who'd thrown him in the pit so that they could forgive them. I'm fairly sure that I've quoted this praise to you before, so no apologies for sharing it again. You see, I believe that your destiny flows out of your history if you allow God to use it. Everything that I've gone through in my lifetime, everything each one of you here has gone through and experienced in your lifetime has made you who you are, even if some of those experiences have been in a pit. And often at the time you're going through an experience, you can't always understand why. But as you look back, if you allow God to be part of it, suddenly it makes sense. God uses circumstances to develop our character. And the reality is that we face circumstances 24 hours a day. Jesus warned us that we would have problems in this world. John 16:33 says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. None of us are immune to pain or insulated from suffering. And unfortunately, in my life, I've heard too many preachers talk about your life can be changed by accepting Jesus and God into your life, which is true. But they talk about there'll be no more suffering, pain, rejection, and so on. And you just skate through life with no problems. I was in Watford yesterday for the football, and another one of my banes of my life are people who stand on the pavement and shout at people as they pass about Jesus. And I don't think that's a way to communicate the gospel. And this guy was pandering this notion that if you come to Jesus, there'll be no more suffering. But as I had a meeting with destiny, I needed to get to the ground. I didn't stop to argue with him, but I have done in the past. But you know what I mean? Life is a series of problems. It almost seems as soon as you solve one problem, another one comes along. Not all of them are big, but all are significant in God's growth process for you. What has been my personal experience is this: God uses problems to draw you closer to him. Think back to those days, those dark days when your heart was broken by the death of a loved one, when you felt abandoned, when you were out of options, or the physical pain had just got too much. You turn to God, or at least I do. It's during times of suffering that we learn to pray our most heartfelt and honest prayers to God. I find myself constantly doing this in my role as a chaplain, as well as praying these sort of prayers when I have been in need. When we're in pain, we don't have the energy for superficial prayers. In your suffering, we will know Jesus. Joni Eareckson writes, when life is rosy, we may slide by without knowing about Jesus, with imitating him and quoting him and speaking of him, but only in suffering will we know Jesus. You could say that we learn things about God in suffering that we can't learn any other way. You see, in this book here, it's full of stories of people suffering and God being with them. God could have kept Joseph out of the jail, kept Daniel out of the lion's den, kept Paul from being shipwrecked 3 times, and kept the 3 Hebrew men from being thrown into the blazing furnace. But he didn't. He let those problems happen, and every one of those people were drawn closer to God as a result. Problems force us to look to God and depend on him instead of ourselves. I can testify to that, and looking around this morning, I'm sure there are others here that could testify to that. You will never know that God is all you need until God is all you've got. You will never know that God is all you need until God is all you've got. What I'm about to say might be okay for some of you, and for others you might struggle with these statements. But here goes anyway. I believe that none of our problems could happen without God's permission. Everything that happens to us is, as it were, Father filtered, and he intends to use it for good, even when Satan and others mean it for bad. My experiences over the 11 months and 2 weeks that I was off work, battling and ultimately overcoming cancer in my body, were at times horrendous. But I can stand here this morning and say, without a shadow of a doubt, it's made me a better chaplain. My wife's grandfather had a saying, he used to say, "nae bad considering." So I was nae bad considering as a chaplain, but I think I've gone up a different level because of what I've gone through. God is sovereignly in control, no matter the outcome, and because every day of your life was written on God's calendar before you were born, everything that happens to you has spiritual significance. That's everything. Now, I don't know about you, but one thing that gets my back up is when Christians misuse God's word, the Bible. You'd probably guessed by now I've fallen into the category of a grumpy old man, and it's something I've got to live up to, but there are just some things that really, really annoy me. You must have been subjected to those folk who take a passage out of context or only spout the beginning of a verse. And for me, the one that really winds me up is Romans 8:28. Oh, how many times have I been subjected to God causes everything to work together for good? I had this trotted out to me so many times when I was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. I think it even was greater than people saying why. For a start, you should quote the whole verse, and even better, verses 28 and 29 together, if you want to get the real intention of what God is saying. So I'll just enlighten you a bit. And we know that in all things God works for good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. What it doesn't say is this: God causes everything to work out the way I want it to. It doesn't say God causes everything to work out to have a happy ending on earth. So to understand Romans 8, 28 and 29, I'm just going to take you through a few phrases very briefly. It starts with "we know." Our hope in difficult times is not based on positive thinking, wishful thinking, or natural optimism. It's certainly based on the truth that God is in complete control of our universe and that he loves us. God is God, whatever the outcome. The next bit is that God causes. There's a grand designer behind everything. Your life is not a result of random chance, fate, or luck. There is a master plan. History is his story. We make mistakes, but God never does. You see, God can't make a mistake because he's God. How about the word everything? God's plan for your life and my life involves all that happens to us, including our mistakes, our sins, our hurts. It includes illness, debt, divorce, disasters, and the death of loved ones. God can bring good out of the worst of our circumstances. To work together, not separately or independently. The events in your life work together in God's plan. They're not isolated acts, but interdependent parts of the process to make you like Christ. I believe that to bake a cake, I say I believe because I've never made one, you must use flour, salt, raw eggs, sugar and oil. Eaten individually, each is pretty disgusting. But bake them together, they become delicious. If you give God all your distasteful, unpleasant experience, He'll blend them together for good. And for the good. This doesn't say that everything in life is good. Much of what happens in the world is evil and bad, but God specializes in bringing good out of it. And it's according to His purpose. And what is His purpose? It is that we become like His Son. Everything that God allows to happen in your life, my life, is permitted for that purpose. So back to the beginning of this message when I used the phrase redemption after hard times. I said I'd give you two personal examples of my own life. So here goes with the second of these, and this is very deeply personal. Before coming to Nottingham, as one of two ministers, we just finished building a brand new church. I personally helped to raise just over £1 million to help to fund the building. We were about to have our official opening, and everything was looking wonderful. And I got called into the senior minister's office, and he handed me a letter to say that to be able to pay the salaries of the folk to work in there, he was putting me on to part-time with immediate effect. And which came as a bit of a shock. The letter I received, the hurt and anger that I felt, left me looking for something else. Because at that time I wasn't really ready for part-time work. And I saw a post advertised at NUH, applied and got it. And at the age of 58, moved on. Still angry. Got even more angry when the senior minister appointed his wife to my post on a full-time salary. And I'll be honest, there were times when I wanted them to fail. But, and this is the big but, I was very happy where God had called us to, here in Nottingham. I had a big jacket to fill, and I was allowed to flourish in my new post. My faith grew. My ability to pray for people and situations grew, and gradually I forgot about it, as this was where God had called us to be. I could see clearly that at a terrible time when I was reduced to being part-time, and more importantly, how it was done wasn't important, because that hard time had resulted in amazing blessings to us as a couple and to me in my ministry. I can honestly say I'm no longer held prisoner to the past. I no longer let it dominate my thinking. I can't forget it because it happened, but it no longer has a hold on me. So I'm never dragged back to the thoughts and emotions that I had in that time. In fact, I saw the guy that did that to me at the game on Saturday, and we gave each other a hug before we went our separate ways to come home. It's part of my life. My journey, it's part of my journey, but it hasn't defined who I am. Instead, it was something that had to happen to release me to achieve my full potential as I serve God and try to live a Christ-like life. We've embarked on a great sort out in the Shivas household before we have some changes done in our home. And our recycling bin is well, I feel for the bin men having to take it away, and the charity shop are being blessed. And just last week I was going through paperwork to shred it, and I came across that fateful letter I received back then from the minister. And just for a millisecond I was tempted to read it again. But no, I don't know why it was still there, but it's no longer there. I suppose I could try and fish it out and try and piece it. No, I'm not going to do. I'm not going to piece it together. But you see, I was tempted to read it and to see how bad it was. But I'm pleased to say I didn't, because it's in the past. And I'm fairly sure that most of you this morning have had bad things happen to you. Things that you don't think are fair. Some things that were terrible, unjust, and these have left you scarred. Again, I would imagine that some of these you've been able to deal with, but there are just some, maybe, that still you revisit your mind from time to time when something or someone triggers something in your mind. If that's you, I want you to be set free from those events that are keeping you from developing your true potential in God. The chains need to be broken. When I talk with families after the death of their loved one in the hospital, and I've listened to them talk about the person who's died, I always talk to them about regrets. You know, the sort of thing that when someone's died, you think, I wish I'd said, if only we'd been able to do whatever we meant to, and so on and so on. I always say to them, whatever those regrets are, I'll pray for them, and we'll leave them here as you leave this hospital room. Leave only with the memories and not regrets. So this morning I'd like us to do the same, except this morning it's dealing with those events in the past that still have a hold on you. What I'd like to do as I close is for us to listen to a piece of music entitled Chain Breaker, sung by a guy called Zach Williams. He's singing to a congregation in Harding Maximum Security Prison in America. The entire congregation of prisoners. And the words are going to come up on the screen. But I'd suggest that when you go home, you can watch the other version, which is actually the live worship on YouTube, where you see all these really hardened criminals talking about how their chains have been broken, singing this song. So I'd like to use this song as a means of starting the process of you finding a release from the past and healing from past hurts. We just get an opportunity to listen to the music, to leave you with your thoughts, and then we'll see where we go once the music's been played. But I want you to take this opportunity to be blessed and to start the rest of your life with the slate wiped clean and the chains that have weighed you down broken.